So these tasks are configured in the tasks.js file. It's a JavaScript module that defines an array of objects conforming to the tasks schema. So when defining these tasks, you have data about contacts on the device that are available to you as you're writing your code, which would be about both people and places, along with all the reports that have been submitted for these people and places. So this information is available to you to manipulate or to iterate through and get the information and the behavior you want. So the task will pull fields from reports and pass data as inputs to the form that opens when the task is selected. So if you have a task that's supposed to pop up, for example, for immunization, you could pass information about previous immunization visits into this task that you want to complete. And one other thing about tasks is that they're only available for users of the type restricted to their place. And this means that when you're creating a user in the CHT, you need to assign to them a place, which could be a community unit. It could be something like a village. It could be just an area within which they operate. And as you build more of these applications, you'll get to find out more about the different ways that you could configure what we call place hierarchies, where different people or different user personas report or work within different units or different places. And these are the units or places they're restricted to. And so anything they do is limited within that unit. So the task schema looks something like this. I've just put a summary of the most common properties that you would normally use. I'll show a link to of where you can go to find the full schema with all the properties that you could use. But these are some of the most common ones, where you have the name that shows that is a unique identifier for the task. You have an icon, which we've talked about previously. So the icon shows along the task, and it could be something that visually represents what the task is about. You also have the title, which contains a translation key, and a translation key will be looked up and return a human readable title from a properties file. And this is something that will probably be talked about in a different session. But the translation key basically represents the title. And you could also put the title itself, but it's good practice to use the translation keys. Then you have the applies to property, which just is about whether or not you want to omit one task per report or one task per contact. So this is set to either contacts or reports, depending on what behavior you want it to have. So if you want every report to have a certain task that it triggers, then you would put reports. Or if you want, for example, every child who is registered or who has been registered on the application to have a task appear for them, for example, when they need to go for the immunization, then you would put contacts so that perhaps it checks against the age and triggers a task anytime they're due for an immunization visit. And then you have the applies if, and just as shown in the description there, first it's a function. It takes a function type, or you write a function for it. And I'll just read what's in the description. If applies to is contacts, this function is invoked once per contact, and report is undefined. If it is reports, then the function is invoked once per report and will return true if the task should appear for the given documents. So just to summarize what's there, it's if, as described before, you're creating tasks for a child who's been registered, then this task or this function is invoked once for every contact. And within the function, you'll be able to check the age of the child and see, or the age of the contact, see if they are a person contact under 5 years old, and return true if they are. Or if you want to set any other conditions, you can do that. If it's type report and it's meant to trigger a task for example, A and C, then here you'd be checking, for example, that the task or that the report is a pregnancy report, and then check the condition. So you can check things like last menstrual period to know when they should go for the next ANC visit. And if those conditions are met, return true. And this means the task will only appear when certain conditions are met. So coming down to applies to type, here's another check that will filter the contacts or reports for which applies if will be evaluated. So you could set that to only the contacts of type person, clinic or health center if your applies to is contacts. If your applies to is reports, then you set it to an array containing the form IDs or form codes of the forms that should trigger that task. So a few more common properties. The resolved if, which checks when a task should be resolved. And usually this is when a certain form is submitted. But you could also set other parameters or other conditions, such as when a certain form is submitted with a specific field being a certain value. And that would result in the task being resolved once that form is submitted, but only if a certain field contains a certain value. And then the event is used to specify the timing of the task. So this is a type object. And within the object, you have certain parameters. You have things like the due date, start and end. So the due date is when the task should be done by. Start would be the days prior to the due date that the task should start showing, and end would be the days after the due date that the task would keep showing. And then lastly, we have the actions that a user can access after clicking the task. We've talked a bit about this. When you select the task, you could have a form that shows up, and this is where the action goes. So we have a link here, which is on the doc site that talks or that lists all this and has a bit more information about tasks. And when you go to this link, you'll be able to find a lot more information about this. I'll share